Brilliant. So welcome everybody. I hope everyone is doing well, and I hope there's plenty of young people listening in as well. I'm going to talk for maybe about 20-30 minutes, not a very long talk, because I'm quite eager to give plenty of time for questions and reflections at the end. So my aim is going to be to provide maybe some ideas to think about now, and also maybe some ideas about going forward in your own relationships with Buddhism. Briefly, a little bit about myself. So I studied Buddhism at SOAS, University of London, which fortunately was not too disrupted by the pandemic. Before that, like many in this country, I first encountered Buddhism through meditation classes, where the first practices that I learnt were the mindfulness of breathing and meditation on loving kindness. And it was by learning these practices that made me originally want to learn the Buddhist context behind them and how they feature in historical Buddhist teachings. That really began the journey which has led me to this point today. Now, a very reasonable and obvious question that many of you may have is simply, am I a Buddhist? And the original title for this session was going to be one which I think many others have spoken to, which is why I am a Buddhist. But actually, I would like you guys, especially the younger people amongst you, to think about what does that even mean? You know, what does it mean to be a Buddhist? There can be obviously a lot of different answers to that question. Some of you may be studying or have studied religious education here in the UK as part of the GCSE curriculum. And as part of RE, you will have studied Buddhism. And if you look at your revision guides on Buddhism, if you look at things like the BBC revision website on Buddhism, you will see a list of things like the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, karma, the Buddhist universe, rebirth, and so on. And it will say something like, this is what Buddhists believe. Of course, they're not wrong. These things are all essential components of Buddhism and Buddhist teachings. But my question would be, as Buddhists, does a list of beliefs like that really capture the difficult, messy, wonderful, and inspiring ideas and identities of what being a Buddhist is like? If someone in your classroom or a friend of yours that you know stops you and asks, oh, you're a Buddhist, what do you believe in? What do you say to them? What should you say to them? And where would you even begin to answer that question? So I would like to suggest a different way of thinking about that question. And it's going to be by asking another question. And that question is something that I am going to ask all of you to answer right now using the chat box. I'll give you a little bit of time to think about it, and then you can write your answer down. Just, one or two words or maybe a short sentence. For all the adults who are watching, of course, you are invited to answer as well. Hope that sounds good to everyone. And my question is this: what inspires you about Buddhism? What inspires you about Buddhism? So take a little moment to think about it. And when you're ready, write down an answer in the chat box. People got some ideas? Here are some examples that, oh, that's a nice one. Wanting peace. Yeah. Finding the ultimate truth. Very much so. The teachings. The Dhamma as a body of work. Here's one that people have said to me before, the idea of compassion. An understanding of how the world works. And maybe one that is especially important, excellent vegetarian food. So some of you may actually have found that question a bit difficult, and that's okay. It is a difficult question, and it's definitely a question that has many, many possible answers. But what I wanted to try and highlight is the practical nature of Buddhism. We can believe in many different things, whether we are Buddhist or not, but I think that maybe a more important or a more relevant question is to ask how these beliefs inspire action. What does Buddhism inspire us to do? And also, how can we see its results in our modern life? So for the rest of the talk, I am going to talk a little bit about a few of the ways that Buddhism has inspired me and how I have tried to use that inspiration in my everyday life. And possibly, I might even talk about whether I have what it takes to be a good Buddhist. Watch this space. So here is one way that Buddhism has inspired me. And in fact, it's something that many people, whether they are Buddhist or non-Buddhist, have found inspiration from as well, which is the Buddha's life story. 2,500 years ago in northern India, there was a man who was a human being like all of us, with a brain which was no different from the brains that we all have, who changed the world forever. And in a way, I could stop there because that by itself is an astounding fact. You know, the Buddha did not just begin a new religious movement, and you know, religions don't come along very often, but his ideas really were revolutionary and have influenced our modern life in so many different ways, from our morality to our psychology. Maybe we don't give each other enough time to stop and think about just how radical the Buddha was. He went against the traditional views of his time. He set about beginning his own order. He was willing to put ideas out into the universe that had never been said before. A very famous professor of Buddhist studies, Richard Gombrich, begins one of his books by saying simply, the Buddha was one of the most brilliant and original thinkers of all time. And this is someone who, incidentally, in the same book, says he doesn't identify as a Buddhist. I think we often talk about the Buddha in terms of a doctor or as a healer. You know, this is something that you can find in the scriptures themselves, with his medical diagnosis being the Four Noble Truths. But something I think that maybe we don't talk about enough is that there is a part of the Buddha who is a scientist. If you think back to his early life, his journey to enlightenment was the work of many, many years. He tried different practices. Some of them didn't work. He fasted until all of his hair fell out. He went to extreme lengths to control his breathing. And he spoke about all of this afterwards, quite openly. These practices did not help me realize my goal. And I think that whether you're a Buddhist or not, his example can remain an inspiration to so many different aspects of our lives, right? He was determined, he was motivated through compassion to others, he used his own mind to find knowledge, and then most importantly, he shared what he learned with as many people as he possibly could. Hopefully many of you can recognize yourselves in these qualities, but sometimes, especially for people who are maybe beginners on the path of practice, it can be quite difficult to do this. There is, of course, a big tradition in Buddhism out of respect and reverence for the figure of the Buddha and for his achievements, to praise his virtues, right? To praise his character. And that can kind of leave you feeling a little bit like, whoa, how am I ever supposed to compare to someone like that, right? Someone like the Buddha. But from my perspective, and I hope that many of you will share it as well, that's just not the right way of looking at it, right? We forget that the Buddha lived a life before his enlightenment, when he did get things wrong. But crucially, he didn't give up, he continued, and he persevered. And one thing that I think is very important to remember is that, you know, the inspiration from the Buddha's life story is not just the end, but it's the whole journey. And this should be a message for us that his achievements are open to all of us as well. And then we come to his actual ideas. Clearly, of course, there is not enough time to give proper credit to the Buddha's teachers in its entirety. So I would like to focus on one example from my own life that has been a really powerful source of motivation. If you know anything about physics, you may have heard of Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. I'm not a scientist, do not worry, I am not going to try and explain the details of the theory of relativity here. But what I would like to mention is some of the reactions to it. One thing that many scientists have said is that once you understand the theory, and I mean really understand it, you're struck by this incredible sense of awe and amazement. It can literally take your breath away, because once you understand it, you see the beauty in it, right? It's like a cover has been lifted from your eyes and you're seeing the world in a completely new way, clearly, for the very first time in your life. And I say that because I feel like I have had this exact same experience with Buddhism. It was shortly after I was beginning to research Buddhism on my own, and I had been dipping in and out of Buddhist writings to deepen my own understanding. And one of these texts was the Dhammapada, now, which is probably considered to be one of the very oldest Buddhist texts. And very early on in the Dhammapada, of course, you get to a very famous verse, which I'm sure many of you will know. And it says, "Never here in this world do hatreds cease by hatred. It's by freedom from hatred they cease. This is an eternal truth." Doesn't seem like a particularly complex statement. You might even be forgiven for thinking it's a little bit self-explanatory, right? But when I first read it, it struck me really deeply. And I really did feel as if the veil had been lifted from my eyes and I was seeing the world clearly in a way which I had never done so before. How does it do that? Well, on so many different levels, I think that that verse captures a fundamental truth about the world, and it describes it simply, poetically, quite beautifully as well. It talks about the cycle of negative emotions. It talks about the dangers of unskillful feelings. It opens you up to the choices you have, the choices that are available to you. It opens up the potential for not just your life, but everything in it, your relationships, your path in the world. And maybe most importantly for me, at that time, experiencing it for the first time, it made a connection between the changes that I can make myself and those same changes resonating everywhere throughout the whole world. What is true for you and for me is also true everywhere for everyone, right? And it says that the act of letting go is sometimes one of the most powerful tools that you have available to you, and that you do have it available to you. I find this inspiring, right? And of course, this is just one drop in a vast ocean of Buddhist teachings. But even that one drop has affected me and affected my progress going forwards in the world. Many of you have already mentioned the things that inspire you about Buddhism. And it doesn't necessarily matter if you are born Buddhist, if your family is Buddhist, if you chose Buddhism for yourself. What I think is important is allowing yourself to maintain that same sense of wonder that comes from those teachings and how they inspire you to better yourself in everyday life. I think the young people amongst you especially are going to inherit a world which is very different from the world today. And no one really knows what it's going to be like, or if we're being honest, how Buddhism is going to fit into that future world. But I do think that as long as we continue to be inspired by these teachings, internalize them, use them, then we have the opportunity to show that Buddhism is relevant and to push it forwards in history, right? Just before we finish, I would like to talk about one occasion where that verse, that teaching, inspired my behavior in a positive way. It was during a time when I was still living at home and my family was going through an incredibly stressful period. And then one night, my mum and me got into a very, very heated argument. We were shouting at each other. We were saying hurtful things to each other. And I'm not proud, but of course, in the end, I stormed out. I went to my room. I slammed the door. And I remember sitting down in my room and just being so angry that I was shaking. But there was a tiny part of me that was still calm enough to provide a little bit of a different perspective. And I remember so clearly that that tiny part said to myself, why don't you just let it go? And that was enough. I suddenly realized all at once that this is useless, this is silly, I'm not going to let myself stay like this. And I went straight back downstairs, I went back to my mum and I said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. And of course, she apologized to me and we hugged it out and we got emotional. And it was, as they say, like a physical weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I literally felt lighter. All of that anger was released and we were able to talk, to communicate and to find some empathy for one another. Such a simple moment, even talking about it now, it is such a simple moment. And there was nothing particularly spiritual about it. In fact, I think quite a lot of people would maybe say the opposite. But I do find myself thinking about that interaction a lot. And that's because I think actually in that moment, I could call myself a good Buddhist. And I think that many of you will have had moments like this as well. And maybe they can be moments where you can say, you know what, I chose Buddhism. And for me personally, I think all of this comes from an engagement, even if it's just a personal one, with what Buddhism is about, which is to say a practical way of living. So if I could encourage you to take anything away from this short discussion, it would be to allow yourselves to cultivate or continue to cultivate the sense of wonder that you get from Buddhist teachings and the inspiration that comes from your Buddhist path, whatever that may be. Because as long as you have that, you will be motivated to use these teachings in your relationships, your career, your whole life. The good news is that these teachings are all available to you. There is no price to pay for being a Buddhist. There is no membership fee. You don't have to study it for a million years in university like I did. What matters is how you engage with it. It's worth remembering that Buddhism is still very new to this country and to many countries in the West, and Buddhism is going to continue to change as it has been changing for thousands of years. You know, one thing I can say for my personal academic practice is that every great stage in the history of Buddhism has been because of people thinking, discussing, disagreeing, and elaborating on different ideas. And I don't see any reason for this not to continue. The younger guys amongst you are going to be a newer generation, and you are going to be asked to integrate Buddhism with new issues, new realities in life that we don't even know about yet, right? You mentioned already about what inspires you about Buddhism, why you chose Buddhism. And I think as long as you maintain that element of your practice, I don't see any reason why you can't represent Buddhism going forwards in the future. And I know that your classes with Bante especially will inspire you to do that. So that's it from me. We've got the time now for questions. And so I would invite all of you guys to ask me anything you like about my education, about studying in the UK, or if you would like to contribute your own thoughts on the discussion, please go ahead. Let's make it collaborative, eh? Anyone? I can't believe that I've managed to cover all the bases.
All I can say is well done, son. Buddhism is a way of life. Well said.
Thank you, Dr.
That's what I want to tell you.
Alex, could you tell me please a bit more about studying at SOAS?
Sure, I absolutely can. SOAS is a very interesting university to go to. It's definitely a university that is trying its best to reconcile itself with our colonial legacy in this country and how we can build on rectifying that in order to study places like Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. That sort of sense of our colonial legacy does affect pretty much everything that we studied there, including Buddhism. You know, I mean, it's very easy for us to forget, I think, that the way that Buddhism is understood in the West does come from colonial legacy. You know, they were the first people that were going over, who were studying these texts. And there was a tendency in some, not all, to sort of see in the texts what they wanted to see, right? Rather than necessarily what the Buddhists themselves wanted to see. So that's something definitely to be expectant of studying at SOAS. The positives are that they have an incredible language range on offer. I studied Sanskrit for a year. There is the potential to study Pali or Tibetan, or if you are interested in Chinese or Japanese or Korean Buddhism, for example, those languages are on offer as well. And they try to cultivate a real sense of sort of intermingling between the different departments, you know. So you're not just studying one aspect of Asia, you are studying a much more holistic picture, you know, whether that's history, culture, religion, of course. I had a wonderful time there. I really, really did. And I do encourage people to look into it if you are interested about not even just studying Buddhism, but studying the history of South Asia or studying different kinds of like global culture. It'd definitely be well worth doing so.
Thank you.
Are there any young people that have questions? Oh, we have one question here. Could you repeat the summary you gave that Buddhism and the essence of it? Well, again, that's a very personal perspective, but I do believe that the important thing for us to take from Buddhism and to carry it forward in the UK and especially in the West is the idea that Buddhism is a practical means, right? It is something that was originally created to guide people to achieving something. A little bit, as I was saying about, you know, the legacy of how Buddhism has been studied in this country has been that it's kind of grouped in with all different kinds of other religions, you know, and when you even say the word religion, there's all sorts of kind of ideas that sort of come from that are probably not always true for Buddhism, right? I mean, you know, the question about whether Buddhism is a religion, a way of life, is, you know, has been going on for so many years now. But I think that you can pick up on the nuances of that so well once you remember that these are intended to be practical teachings, right? They are supposed to inspire you to action in this world, and it provides you with evidence, and it provides you with a whole list of different incidents and stories about how these teachings have helped people in the past, how they have contributed to people's betterment. And really, that's something that should be stressed, you know, and should be stressed as Buddhism sort of makes its way around the UK and the West, because I think that that is really what Buddhism is about. Are there any final questions? Okay, well, we're coming up to the end of the session now. I'm sure that there's another one coming soon after. So I would like to thank all of you for joining and hearing a little bit about why I chose Buddhism. You are free, of course, to contact me. Bante has my contact details if there's anything that you would like to ask elsewhere. But otherwise, I'd like to wish you a really good day. Have a great weekend. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.